Okay, everybody, welcome back to History Help. We're coming at you with another baller video. Today's video is going to be on World War II. All right, so to further understand World War II, we've got to look at these important topic questions here. So our questions of this lesson are the question around this lesson is why do wars occur? So nations compete over natural resources, and individuals demand greater political and economic freedom. We will study three aspects of World War II: the war in Europe against Germany and Italy, the war in Asia with Japan, and the home front in America. So what caused World War II in Europe? Germany wanted back what she had lost from World War I, and revenge, appeasement. Great Britain and France gave Hitler land without fighting for it. Hitler was a racist. He invaded countries simply to kill the Jews that were living there. So the treaties of Versailles, probably mispronounced that, guys, but the end of World War I. So the main points of the treaty were BRAT, which is an acronym. This stands for, what you're going to see here. So 1, Germany had to accept the blame for starting the war. That was the B in BRAT. Germany had to pay reparations for the damage done during the war. Reparations, that is the R. Germany was forbidden to have submarines or an air force. She could have a navy of only 6 battleships and an army of just 100,000 men. A, army. And finally, Germany lost territory, land, in Europe. So yeah, so I'm going to look over here at this map in a second. And Germany's colonies were to be given in Britain and France, T, territory. So if we look at the map here, ladies and gents and ladies, we'll see that Germany's colonies were given to France and Britain. So Germany, this became a demilitarized zone, which means there's no military activity at all here. This was given back to France, and then I believe this was given over here to France and Britain. They divided it pretty equally. So the Depression in the 1920s in Europe is the next one we're going to look at. So the economy was bad in Europe. World War I had killed a lot of workers and customers, and after years of humiliation and starvation, Germans looked for a strong leader. Nazis elected to power. Nazis promised to build up their army and get revenge for World War I. This is, in the picture on the right, is Adolf Hitler in 1933. So yeah, so Mussolini was the Italian leader at this time. He was the Italian dictator, basically what Italians have. And that the guy on the left underneath where it says Italy. And the guy who's more like a military-looking cat is Adolf Hitler, Germany. So Germany in the late 1930s. Germany escaped the Depression by militarizing. So this picture on the right here was Berlin in 1936. So I'm sure you guys can. So I'm sure you guys can see some of the changes they're making there. Looks like there's a watchtower there where that clock is. Appeasement. Hitler wanted land. Britain and France let him have it without war. So yeah, so here's just one part of Hitler's army in that picture. So yeah, here's the big thing. So World War II started when Hitler invaded Poland in 1939. Fortress Europa. In no time, Germany conquered most of Europe with tanks, planes, and railroads. So the red is all Nazi-occupied territory. The yellow is Britain. So yeah, we're going to look at a few pictures here. So this is Hitler in Paris after he conquered France. I'm standing in front of the Eiffel Tower. The Battle of Britain. So the Battle of Britain, if you guys don't know, was more or less of an air battle because Britain is surrounded by water. And so Hitler did a lot of bombings on Britain to try to make them weaker. Basically what he's trying to do was bomb them to the point where they would surrender and Hitler would get Britain. And then from Britain, he would move troops over there and try to get Ireland and get all of that. However, Britain held out against the German bomb. So now we're going to look at the USSR or Russia in that area up in northern Europe. So yeah, so tough cold winters killed many Nazi troops in the USSR, and the Russian people are tough. 21 million dead, yet no surrender. And finally, we have a picture here of D-Day, which is when the United States, along with Britain and territories of Britain, which at this point were Canada and Australia and a couple of other places, stormed the beaches of Normandy to try to barge in the Germans into occupied Nazi territory. A tank. So one of the big developments in World War II was tanks. The U.S. had the Sherman tank, which was a tank named after, I believe it's actually named after General Sherman. Don't call me on this, but I believe it's named after General Sherman in the Civil War, because the American people thought tanks were these strong machines and they could just push right through anything. And that's sort of what General Sherman did in the Civil War. He pushed right through the South. So that's why they called them Sherman tanks. This here is a German tank. German tanks were typically Tiger tanks, is what they call them. I'm sure it had some meaning in German. I don't take German. So yeah, the anti-tank weaponry. So this is when we started seeing a lot of bombs that were being able to drop from planes, ordnances that would be able to explode. Tanks. This is when we saw the beginning of rocket-propelled grenades, RPGs. They're called I knew for a fact they were called Panzerschrecks in Germany. That's how you say it. Propelled grenade. And then also during this time we had the invention of PAC-32s. If you don't know what those are another somewhat heavy ordnance gun that were heavy ordnance to take out Sherman tanks and other tanks. So yes, so we're gonna go back to the Battle of Britain here. So the English Channel protected England, and Britain resisted the German Air Force. So Britain has sort of all these measures in place that intercept the German radio chatter. So they were sort of know when the bombings were going to take place. And they also had a pretty good radar system too, detecting when the Germans were going to be coming to do bombings. So Germany's end. So Germany invaded the Soviet Union and lost 1 million troops due to the cold and Russian bravery. Germany spent too many resources trying to kill the Jewish people and not supporting the troops. Germans fought Russians in the east and the Americans and the Brits in the west. Germany surrenders in April of 1945. You can see a little picture here. You have a guy saying 1,000 years, not in a lifetime. And yeah, so the capital of Germany was Berlin, and this is a picture of the Soviets when they made their before the United States. Yeah. So now we're going to look at some of the stuff that was going on in America during the time of this war. So without further ado, as you can see, meanwhile in the USA, so U.S. isolationism. Americans wanted to stay out of Europe's wars. FDR stands for Franklin Roosevelt, who was the president at this time. He wanted to help Britain anyway. So the U.S. had two oceans to protect them, sort of. So as you can see here, we have the United States between the United States and Africa, we have the Atlantic Ocean, and we had the Pacific Ocean. So yeah, so the sort of part of this is, even though the United States sort of thought they were safe, they really weren't, because of all Hitler's U-boats. You don't know what the U-boat is. That is a German submarine, and Hitler had a lot of orders around these submarines. And he would say to the Navy, "Your job is to go out and try to explode or blow up the Ally boats that were carrying war stuff like tanks, ordnances, ammunition, health stuff, medicine for all the wounded troops." He was telling them, "You need to go out there, blow these ships up, cut off their supply route in the United States." And we're going to continue to look at how the U.S. Ocean around the U.S. sort of protected them. All right, so the Lend-Lease Act. So Franklin Roosevelt sent war materials to Britain and the USSR. So this was like ammunitions, bombs, tanks, other military vehicles. So yeah, this is the Sherman tank, as I said before. Those are the tanks the U.S. typically used, and the Soviets had their own tanks that were just like that. So this is when so now we're going to backtrack a little bit, and this is going to be, now we're going to look at when America entered World War II, and this was on December 7th, 1941. Japan bombing Pearl Harbor is what this photo is. So before we get any more into this, we're going to have to look at the Axis powers, not to just the Allied powers. We'll look at those in a second. The Axis powers are this. So Germany and Italy declared war, and immediately after Pearl Harbor, Germany, Italy, and Japan made a deal to help each other in case one was attacked. Now we're going to look at the Allied powers. So the Allied powers are America, of course, the American flag. The flag in the middle is the British flag, and the flag all the way on the right is the Soviet flag. So the Allies were the USA, Great Britain, and the Soviet Union. USSR, sort of like that. These are called the Big Three because at this time, at this point in the world, these three countries had probably the biggest armies. China had a pretty big army too, but we'll get that in a second. So in addition, there were the colonies and territories of these countries. These included China, Canada, Australia, France, Poland, and others. So France at this point, I wouldn't really classify it as a colony or territory because they were just taking over, but they had the French resistance, which was the Marquis, who were fighting with the Allies, and the remainder of the French army that had managed to flee, Poland resistance, Polish resistance. But the three big territories that were right here are China, Canada, and Australia. And something I'm going to point out about all of those is they were under British control. That's one thing to point out. Definitely Australia under British control, definitely Canada. China was somewhat under British control. I think at this point, most of China was under British control because China hadn't given Hong Kong back to the, I mean not China, Britain hadn't given China, Hong Kong back yet. But, so let's continue. So the USA's contribution to the production, was production, not blood. Women in the workforce. So yeah, so back in this time, almost all the men were overseas fighting in World War II, in Germany and in Japan. So what were the women supposed to do to provide for their families? Well, of course the kids would go to school. And women were typically known to do the stuff around the house, like wash the dishes, clean the clothes. But at this point in time, the women were really needed in the military workforce. So a lot of the women back there would be making money, supporting their families by making planes, tanks, ammunition, bombs. We saw a lot of this during World War II and a lot of it during World War I as well. And so these two posters here where it says Rosie the Riveter, they're sort of to entice the woman to come work because they want the women to come work because in turn it will help their husbands who are overseas fighting. So during this time we had rationed goods for war use. So yes, this time there was still a great deal of racism in the United States, so the army was segregated, but African Americans served. So the first time African Americans actually served in the United States Army was the Civil War. First regiment in the Civil War that was African American, believe it or not. It was here in Massachusetts. It was the Massachusetts, no quote me on this, but it was either the 54th or it was like either the 54th or it was a really big number. It was like the 445th maybe. But it wasn't Massachusetts regiment. It was the first African American army. But one thing that the armies did notice is that the African Americans were really good fighters. So I don't know too much about the Tuskegee Airmen. So we will look into that more in the future. So we're sort of going to skip over this slide because I don't know too much about it. So women in the forces. So yeah, as I said before, a lot of women were doing stuff medically wise. They became doctors sort of, and ammunition, as I said before, planes, tanks, cars, trucks, everything that was guns, everything that was needed to go overseas to help the people fighting, help the men who were fighting in World War II. There's another woman in the forces picture. So how did the USA pay for this war? War bonds. So that was sort of like the cash back then. So people would buy into these bonds, and in that turn would accumulate money for the war. So yeah, so overseas we saw Hitler sort of isolating the Jews and trying to kill them off. So after the Pearl Harbor attack, the U.S. sort of did the same thing for the second time in its history. The first time we sort of took a group of people and isolated them into a camp was with the Native Americans in the 1860s. However, the U.S. is going to do this again in the 1940s after the Pearl Harbor bombing with Japanese Americans. So as we can see here, it says USA was afraid that if Japan were to attack the Pacific coast, the Japanese Americans would aid them. So the government ordered them to move them to camps. However, unlike the Nazis, at these camps, they were well fed. They weren't worked to death. They were just sort of trying to isolate them so that if something did happen, they would be they'd be watched by some troops. So here's a picture of one of the camps. You can see it's a little bit nicer than some photos you'll see. You've probably seen in your classes of the camps that Hitler had for the Jewish, of the concentration camps. Yeah, so strangely, the Japanese Americans did serve in the army, just like African Americans. They did serve in the army. So we're gonna skip. So if you guys wanted, guys, this is gonna be a little fun little break here. So there's gonna be a little quiz coming up. If you want to pause, if the teacher showing you this video wants to pause the screen right now before we go over the answers, you can do that right now. All right, coming back here, let's go over the quiz. So I don't have a slide for this, for the answers to this, so we're just going to go down it right now. So number one, how did the USA pay for World War II? Bonds. Number two, who were the Allied powers besides the USA? Besides the USA, Russia, or USSR if you want to put that, and Britain. Why did the USA intern Japanese Americans? Because they were afraid if Japan attacked the Japanese Americans and helped them. What was the Lend-Lease Act? An act that said that America would send war materials to its allies during this war. And when was the Pearl Harbor attack? That was, we might have to go back for this one. No, I'm just kidding. So that would be, I would have just put, I believe it's December 7th, 1941. The teacher can correct you if that is incorrect. So now we're going to look on the other aspect of things, which is in Asia during World War II. So Japan wanted China in the USSR. Japan is an island, and not a big one, we knew that. They wanted more living space and resources for their superior people. So there's sort of a key up top here in this picture. You can see where it says the solid black is British, solid white is Dutch, and the dotted is Japan-occupied territory. So you can see that China has some Japan-occupied territory. Some of the smaller islands are a little occupied by Japan. You can see for the most part, China was Dutch, Mongolia was Dutch, Tibet and Sikkim Dutch, and there's some other Dutch and British stuff down there. But you can see how they're getting closer there to the USSR. So Japan wanted oil reserves. So Japan wanted more oil, and so they invaded China because they knew China would have oil. And America was at this point embargoed in oil in Indonesia. So Japan considered this an act of war. So Japan joins the Axis powers. This is going to take it back a little bit on why Japan joined Germany and Italy. So Germany was sick of the U.S. helping Britain with its Lend-Lease program. Japan agreed to attack Pearl Harbor and distract the U.S. from the Europe War. So basically, Japan's leader talked to Hitler, and Hitler was like, if you could do something so that the U.S. would be more distracted with you, so we'd have an easier time fighting off the Brits, that would be great. So what does Japan do? They drop bombs and do the Pearl Harbor bombing. So the battle for Midway Island. If won, the Japanese could have bombed Hawaii more from here. This is a major turning point in the war because the U.S. did end up winning the war. So the reason it's called Midway Island is, I don't have a map for this, but if you look at a map, it's sort of the island. It was a sort of an island that was in between Hawaii and Japan. That's why they called it Midway Island. And as you can see from the picture, I'm sure back then it didn't have the airstrip. It could have, but I don't think it did. I think this is more of a recent picture. there's actually 2 airstrips, which would have made it a great spot for them to land their planes and fuel their bombers. But yeah, so we're now going to look at island hopping. So U.S. fought gradually to reach Japan. So this is a good little map here. So all in the right here, you have Pearl Harbor. The U.S. started from there, battled Japan at Midway. Then they came back to, it's pronounced Iwo Jima. And they sort of went through all these little islands here, battling Japan to try to get all the way to Japan itself. So yeah, so the battle for Iwo Jima. So island hopping became a fact of the war with Japan. So 6,800 U.S. troops died in the fight with Japan, and 20,000 Japanese troops died. But during this fight with Japan, the American flag was raised here, and it was used as a morale boost for the soldiers on the island. So kamikaze attacks. So kamikaze attacks were a common practice for Japanese fighter pilots. They were developed by, it's called kamikaze attacks because the Japanese, I believe it was the head of the Navy. He was the head of the Navy and the Air Force. His last name was something kamikaze, and he developed this method of attacking ships where they would fuel up bombers, and instead of dropping bombs or using the planes to fire at ships, they would usually just fly right into the side of a ship and blow it up. So here's a picture of a kamikaze attack. You can see the plane is just flying right towards the U.S. battleship, and the pilots basically committing suicide, but they're told they're doing it for their country. And there's another picture of a kamikaze attack. This ship's blowing up. So this is the plane that dropped the atom bomb on Hiroshima. That was the major turning point in the war, is when the U.S. dropped the atom bomb on Japan, and that's really when Japan decided we're going to have to surrender. They're just too powerful. So yeah, there's the atom bomb, or the atomic bomb that was dropped. Well, it looks like the one that was dropped. So Hiroshima and Nagasaki, 1945. A picture of one of the victims of the bomb that was dropped in Hiroshima. So why drop the atomic bomb? The Japanese had shown that they would fight to the last man, woman, and child. The atomic bomb saved as many as 1 million U.S. lives and possibly many Japanese as well. So Harry Truman became president at this time, and he said, so Harry Truman, who was president at this time, said, we dropped the bomb to end the war versus Japan. So in 1945, Japan surrenders. You can see all these happy U.S. Army men coming back from sailors to their wives, giving them kisses. So World War II deaths. You can see USSR, there was 22 million deaths during World War II for the Russians. China had 11 million deaths. Germany had 7 million. Poland had 7 million. US had 500,000 deaths. Great Britain had 300,000 deaths. And Japan had 1.5 million deaths. Alright, so here's another quiz for you guys to take if you want to stop and pause the video right now. I'll give you a couple minutes to do that. Alright, coming back here, let's go over to the second quiz. So what cities were nuclear bombed? Hiroshima would be the correct answer. It should be what city? Define island hopping. It's moving from island to island quickly. What was the importance of the Midway Island battle? The importance of the Midway Island battle was for control over. The importance of it was that it stopped Japan from establishing a runway where they could bomb the U.S. and Hawaii easier. And why did Japan want war with the USA? They wanted war over oil, and they wanted war to sort of help Hitler. And what ocean protected the USA from Japan? The Pacific Ocean. So yeah, if you want to see any more of my PowerPoints, they're at worldofteaching.com. These are where I got some of my PowerPoints from. They're great PowerPoints. If you want to see any more of my PowerPoints I can post on there, you can totally do that. You can just Google that and do the first or second link. I would thank you guys for coming back, watching another video. Remember to like, subscribe, comment, and share. You guys are the best, and I love you all. Thank you for watching.